should we run this like a little Q&A, do you think? Like have people
Well, I had a couple
questions, or do you want
a couple of things I was going to talk about, because
Okay.
what I wanted to talk about is photography. You know, photography itself, I would say, is relatively easy. You point a camera in the right direction and then you press a button. It's quite simple, you know, and it doesn't matter what camera you use. I don't like, there's a lot of kind of snobbery where people say you have to have this expensive bit of kit. I have a camera that I got given 25 years ago. It costs about $100. That's what I use. Or I use my phone. So it doesn't matter what equipment you've got. What I'm interested in is the story. And I believe a photograph can change the world, and it can make a huge difference to people's lives. So I just wanted to really give a little bit of maybe 3 examples of stories I've told through photography. And maybe that can get people to think about how they could approach photography. So not just thinking about the visuals, not thinking about making a pretty image, but thinking about what will this photograph do? What will it make happen? And how should I do it in a way that's appropriate to the person I'm photographing? So I wanted to just tell a couple of stories, if that's all right with you. So the first one is, I was doing a story on refugees in Jordan a few years ago. And I'd been told about a refugee camp where people were living in real squalor, in a really bad situation. They weren't getting any help from charities. They were there on their own. And somebody said, you know, you should go and document that story. And I get there to these sort of abandoned buildings. And this woman comes out, and she's a very old lady. She has tattoos on her face. She's wearing a black robe, and she comes screaming at me. And now I've been to some war zones. I've never been as scared in my life as I was by this 80-year-old woman screaming at me. And she comes charging at me, and she said, "We don't want a photographer here. We want help. We do not want a photographer." And I was like, "Well, Grandma, you're right. I understand, but let me just visit." And, you know, this often happens. Why would somebody want you to photograph them in their worst moment of their life? But this is where I say photography is all about trust and relationships. So I didn't take my camera out of my bag. I rarely do take my camera out. And I said, "Can I just visit?" And I did every day for a week. For 7 days, I went and spent my whole day just talking to people, talking to families, children, to the adults, and getting to know a little bit about them. And on the 7th day, I was ready to start taking photographs. So I have this white sheet, a bed sheet that I travel with that I use as a backdrop, and I set it all up. And I was thinking about who I was going to ask first to do their portrait. Now, in the 7 days I'd been there, this woman, Shamar, we hadn't spoken, but every so often I would kind of catch her out the corner of my eye, just watching what I was up to. So on this day when I was ready to start taking portraits, I set up my white sheet, I'm getting my camera ready, and as I turn around, Shamar is stood in front of this white sheet, ready to have her portrait done. Now, I never asked to take her photograph. And she, 7 days before, said she didn't even want me there. But now she was ready for her portrait. And that's why I always say the best photographs are not taken, but they're given. And what Shamar was doing was giving me her photograph. I don't like that phrase, to take a photograph. You don't take it. A great photograph is always given to you. So that's photograph 1. I think we have it there somewhere, photograph number 1. Can we get it up? And there we go. And that's Shamar. And that for me is this idea that you have to build trust and a relationship in a photograph. And when you get that, then you get to do a beautiful portrait like Shamar's. And one funny element about this, you can see that she has these tattoos. She's from the Berber tribe, which is a nomadic tribe. And I sort of said to her, being sort of stupid Western, I was like, "Oh, tell me what these mean. They must have, you know, real story. And wow, what is it?" And she said, "We were young and stupid." So it turns out getting tattoos when you're young and stupid is a universal thing. So I'm going to move on to another story now, so we can take that picture down.
That's a beautiful story and a beautiful photograph too. Thank you.
Yeah, and as I say, and that's how people should, you know, approach photography, is about building up a trust. You don't go and take photographs. You wait until people are ready to share their story with you.
It's a tiny bit discouraging because it sounds like it takes a full week to take a picture.
You know, it doesn't necessarily mean that. Sometimes it can be very quick. I mean, one of my tricks is to eat with people. So when I'm traveling, if I meet a family that I'm going to be documenting, I will say, "Can we share a meal together?" Mm-hmm. And we sit and we eat, because I always say the difference between an acquaintance and a friend is when we've eaten together. Mm. And, you know, friendships, you know, when you meet somebody you like, you ask them out for a meal, for a date. You know, we commemorate at weddings with food. When we get families together, it's all about food. And food is a great way to build relationships. So when I meet people, it's one of the things I always do is say, let's sit down, let's eat, let's share a meal, and then do photographs afterwards. But whatever it is, the point is just don't turn up with your camera, because as soon as you have the camera and you're just taking photographs, you've actually created a barrier between yourself and the person you're photographing. So, you know, if I given 1 hour, if I was doing your portrait and I had 1 hour to do it, I would rather spend 55 minutes talking with you and 5 minutes taking a photograph. And doing it that way, I would get a much better portrait. So all I'm saying is, whatever you're doing, just remember that some of the most important work you can do in photography is when you don't have the camera in your hand. It's about building a relationship.
Can I just interject one thing, piggybacking on that? You know, we do these photo shoots as actors where we're doing like a, you know, cover shoot or something like that. And it's obvious, you know, it's obvious we're going to give our photos. We're showing up there. We're not going, you know, we're not going to put up, you know, serious resistance. But the photographers who develop a friendly rapport with us, who are able to like make a human connection before and during the process, are the ones that get the best photographs from us, or the ones that we give the best photos to. And the ones, and there's a lot of like contrived banter that is very common, I would say, with photographers. Like, oh yeah, that's great, you're looking like, you know, where they're trying to like shower you in false flattery or something like that in order to extract a photo from you. And you can see it on our faces. It just feels like, you know, we clam up when that's happening. So anyway, as a not infrequent subject of photography, I know what you're talking about from the other end.
Yeah, and you know, it's I always say photography is also like a conversation. You know, it involves two people. So when I'm making somebody's photograph, I really like to feel that I'm having a conversation with them. And you know, when I've got a good photograph, it's the same feeling as when you're on a date. And you go on a date, a first date, second date with someone, you've just met them, you're not sure if they like you. And there's just a moment when it suddenly becomes just you two in the room. You just click and you just look at each other and you know that something's happening. There's a feeling. And it's like that for me. When I'm doing a portrait, there's just that moment where me and the person who I'm photographing, we just connect, and the rest of the world just disappears, and it's me and them. And that's when you know you've got the great portrait. So I wanted to tell another story, and this is a story, you know, close to really, you know, our relationship, how we got to know each other. And it's about a woman called Khulud. Now Khulud was living in Syria. She was shot by a sniper there. She was paralyzed. It's a tragic story. When I met her, she was living in a makeshift tent in the Bekaa Valley. I say a makeshift tent, it was just literally bits of plastic, cardboard, you know, a shelter in the most basic sense. And she lived there with her children and her husband. I've probably never met anybody in more desperate need of help and support, and somebody that was not receiving it. It was really, you know, this unspeakable situation. So I took the photograph. I did this portrait of her and her husband, Jamal. And it came back to the UK, to London. The picture was published. It appeared all around the world. I felt very pleased with myself. You know, this picture, the story had been, you know, shown. People knew what was going on. About 2 years later, maybe 3 years later, I was back in Lebanon. And I went back to revisit a few families that I'd been photographing there. And one of those families I was trying to get in contact with was Khulud. And the last day I was in Lebanon on this trip, I got a phone call from Khulud's husband, Jamal. And he said, I hear you're trying to find us. You wanted to meet us again. We'd love to see you. And I said, of course, where are you now? And I will always remember his answer. He just said, we're in the same place. And I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. I felt like, where? And he said, we're in the same tent. And I felt physically sick. I thought, of all the people I'd met 2.5 years before, nobody was in more desperate need than this woman living in a tent that had no windows, that water came in, that was hot in the summer. She had no space. She was trapped in this bed. And I thought arrogantly, as a photographer, I had taken this photograph. It had appeared around the world. Surely something should have changed. So I said, look, I'll come and see you the next day. I canceled my flights. I went to the place where they were. I hadn't even thought to look there because I just assumed something would have changed. And I get there and I walked in and I burst into tears. I saw Khulud on the bed and I just broke down in tears and I said, I failed you. I failed you. I took your photograph. You gave it to me, the story. I failed you. You're still like living like this. Now, Khuluda's like an angel. She just smiled and she said, it's okay. We knew you'd come back. Now imagine for 2.5 years, lying in a bed, staring at the same bit of ceiling. You can't get out. She hadn't been out in the air. There was no window. Her children had to sleep on the floor by her bed. There's a tiny little room on the side which has a kitchen. It's torture. And yet it's a house that's full of love and laughter. So I thought the only thing I can do is take more photographs and tell her story again. So we can get up some of those photographs. So photograph number 2. There, yep. And so this was the photograph I took the first time I'd met them. This was the photograph that I thought would change their lives. This is Khulud and Jamal. And as I say, nothing changed. So when I went back the next time, I started taking more photographs. So we can go to number 3. So this is Jamal cooking in the kitchen. If we go to number 4. And you know what's beautiful is when we're in this kitchen, often Jamal will whisper to me and he'll say his greatest fear is that Khulud doesn't love him as much as he loves her. That's his genuine greatest fear. I mean, they are the most beautiful couple. You can go on to the next photograph. He's obviously her full-time carer. Go on to number 6. The kids do the homework on bed with Khulud. But you can see, I mean, from that wall, I mean, it's like this oven. It's like bits of corrugated metal. Can you imagine what it's like in the summer, in the winter? But it's a place, as I say, full of love and laughter. We can go on to number 7. Yeah, well, the next one, great. You know, they do cooking on the bed. As I say, it's an amazing place. If we go to photograph number 9. So on the last day I was there, I took this photograph. And one of the things I like to do is take the photographs with me of the people that I photographed before. I like to give them copies of the photograph. So I did this photograph. And I started thinking to myself, I have in my bag the photograph that I had taken 2 years before. And I thought, normally I'll give it to them. But as I looked at this photograph, I realized that nothing had changed, that the photograph was almost identical to the photograph I'd done 2 years before. And I thought, if I give them this photograph, won't it just make them realize that nothing changed? Won't it make them realize I failed, that they're in this hopeless situation? Won't it be a horrible reminder of that? But I thought, no, I have to give them that photograph. So I leant down, got this photograph out of my bag, and I handed them the photograph that I'd done 2 years before, which is number 10. But before I gave them this photograph, I looked at Khulud and I said, when I took this photograph, I did not take a photograph of a disabled woman. I did not take a photograph of a refugee. When I took this photograph, I was taking a photograph of a couple who are so in love with each other. And this actually is a photograph of love. And that's when I realized I get called a war photographer, but I'm not. I document love. I travel to some of the worst places you can imagine, but the story I find there is of humanity. I see a grandmother brushing a granddaughter's hair. I see a mother feeding her baby, a father on the floor doing classwork with his kids. I document those relationships and that love. And that's what I mean about stories. And then, this is the incredible thing, is I came back with this story and I was telling it at various talks and at various events. And at one of those events in San Francisco, it led to our connection, us getting involved with work together. And because of their love and because of that story, we were able to do the first fundraiser together. And through GISH and random acts, we were able to rehouse Khulud and her family and give them a second chance at life. So when somebody says to me, you know, does a photograph change the world? I always tell them the story of Khulud, because they trusted me with their story. I had to work hard to do it. I had to go back again and do it. But because of them, it meant we were able to help many, many other families as well in Lebanon. So that's again, for me, the power of photography.
My friend and GISH partner, Philip, is the one who saw your talk.
Yeah.
And he saw you talking about the frustration you felt coming back 2 years later.
Yeah.
And and that was the seed of the idea, like maybe we can help here. But I also remember um, first talking to you and first hearing about your true emotional. You were almost bereft about the fact that you hadn't been able to make a material change in their lives, because I think obviously from what you just said, the driving force behind a lot of the work that you do with your life is to try to make a positive impact on the world, is to try to make change.
Yeah.
And when you go through these great lengths and document these stories that are so compelling and so heart-wrenching, to not have something immediately sprout forth from that has got to be incredibly painful. But the patience and persistence and determination that you demonstrated there really ultimately came to bear. And by the way, interestingly, it was us, Random Acts and GISH sharing those stories that actually helped the circumstances of other refugees that were Syrian refugees living in Lebanon at the time.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I guess sometimes you don't know how these things are going to unfold. I think you assume that you're going to publish a story in a well-read periodical magazine, and that the right people in seats of power are going to see that story and do a top-down change to help these people. But it could just as well be a bunch of weirdos who are playing a scavenger hunt that end up taking the reins on something like that.
And really, that story changed the way I work and the way I approach things because of what happened with GISH in the kind of the weeks and months afterwards. I always said, I remember somebody came to an exhibition of my work once, and they looked at all my photographs and they were almost angry, and they said, "Do you think you can change the world with your photographs?" And I said, "No, I don't. But I hope I can inspire the person that can." And that's what I ever try and do with my stories. And what's been fantastic is this relationship with GISH is we've been able to share, over the last few years, some of these incredible stories. And we've seen how that's inspired all those amazing people to come together and create change. And increasingly, we realize that the change does start with the people. It's not going to be led from up the top. And I'm just glad that I can play my small part in by capturing these stories and telling these stories and sharing them. And I had one last photograph I wanted to talk about in storytelling, which I don't actually talk about this photograph very much anymore because it's really from my past. Because, photography is also a really powerful tool to help you overcome your own adversities, whether that be mental health issues, self-worth, how you feel about the way you look. As some of you will know, in 2011, I was injured by a landmine in Afghanistan, and I lost both my legs and my arm. 3 months after my injury, I was well enough for the first time to be taken to have a shower. So I was put in a wheelchair and kind of wheeled in. I'd been in intensive care until that point. And I saw myself in a mirror, and I was repulsed by what I saw. I saw this body with parts missing, scars across my body, and I was kind of disgusted by it. And I think we were talking about this the other day. I cried myself to sleep that night. I thought I didn't want to live. So after that, the next day, as I said, I woke up with a kind of renewed positivity and a new focus, and I wanted to get my life back on track. The first thing I needed to deal with was how I saw myself. As I say, I'd suffered from years of mental health issues, not great values of self-worth, and now I had these horrific injuries. I just thought I was this disgusting kind of creature. I just didn't even want to look at myself. It's a big thing, because if you imagine, most of what you see of yourself is like your legs and your arms. Now they were missing, just scars, painful. And so it was really difficult for me. Friends came to visit me in hospital. I'd cover myself with a sheet. I didn't want them to see this. I didn't want people to see me in the street. And I decided, well, how am I going to come to terms with what's happened to me? And I thought, well, photography is the only way. I'm dyslexic. I was told I was stupid at school. I was held back a year at class. At 18, I got given a camera and I found my voice. And I thought the only way, therefore, for me to now deal with what was happened to me is through that voice, is through my photography. And for the first time in my life, I would turn the camera on myself. I'd spent years documenting people in terrible situations. Now I was that person. And so I decided the thing I wanted to do was a self-portrait. So a friend came and bussed me out of hospital. I had all these tubes in at the time, and he kind of took all these tubes. We were probably doing stuff we shouldn't have done. And we went to his photographic studio. And just before I'd been to Afghanistan, the week before I went to Afghanistan, I'd been in the British Museum in London. And it has an amazing collection of different artifacts, including Roman and Greek statues. And most of those statues are actually missing parts. Most of them have got limbs missing, bits missing. But you never notice that. You just see the beauty of what is there in these old statues. And I decided that's how I wanted to portray myself. And so I kind of called this my Greek statue image. And so I went to the studio. I felt very nervous. I felt very vulnerable and in a really difficult situation. But I knew this is how I had to deal with my own self-perception. And so I did the photograph, and we can put it up now. And I did this self-portrait. It's coming up. And this was the moment that I took control of my life again. You know, I said to the whole world, this is who I am. And I don't really care what you think of when you're looking at me. What is important is, how do I see myself here? Because I knew when I did this photograph that although I was now missing limbs, I was actually a stronger man. I was more focused. I was a better person. And this was the moment when I took control of my life, and I basically said to people, I don't care if you stare, if you look, because this is how I see myself. And that picture appeared in the front of a major paper in the UK. I remember I was so nervous that, you know, thousands and thousands of people were going to see this photograph, you know, on the Sunday morning. But it was so empowering. It was so empowering, because after that point, I never had any problems with the way I looked anymore. I never worried about people stopping to look, or how I felt about my own body. And so that's one of the things, really, I guess the final thing I wanted to say is photography is this incredible storyteller. You know, we've talked about how it can change people's lives through awareness. It can be an advocate for them. You know, we can change the world through images, but we can also turn the camera on ourselves. And photography can be one of the most powerful tools to help you express your own inner feelings and to overcome a lot of those things. Because a lot of people maybe can't write, or they can't draw, they can't do any of the artworks. Photography is, I like it because it's relatively simple. I mean, it's a machine, you can do it. But you can use that and turn it on yourself and tell your own story. And it doesn't mean you have to do a self-portrait when I say turn it on yourself. I just mean photograph your life, photograph what you go through. It can be like, I have a friend and she did an amazing series of photographs, which is just, she was suffering from very bad depression, and they were just photographs inside her bedroom every morning of just the kind of the wall. But that was how her mind was. And she was able to tell that story through photography. So what I would say is just remember that we're talking about all these amazing stories around the world. You know, I get to meet some of the most incredible people, incredible hardships, but the most important story, it's your own.
Giles, thank you. That was such a lovely final panel for this one-day GISH hunt. So inspiring and such a nice reflection. Really appreciate you.
No, it's been a real pleasure. And as I say, you know, one of the greatest things in my life in the last 4 years is getting to know the GISH community and feeling part of that. So I'm you know, as grateful to every single one of you GISHers out there as I am to have these opportunities. So thank you.
Well, I honestly don't think that we would be here if it weren't for you. So thank you for sort of jumping in the pool with us. Everyone who's in this chat, you have a GISH item assignment here, which is to document someone you love in pictures. And thank you, Giles. Always a pleasure.
It's been a pleasure, and lovely to see all your faces. And yeah, everyone take
a video of Hokey Pokey.
Bye. Bye.